Sami Hamdi, a journalist and political commentator traveling to Florida to address an audience, is abducted by ICE agents from San Francisco International Airport, held in detention which could be for weeks, awaiting either arrest or eviction from the country. Sounds like more 1930s Germany, with the abduction of Jews and communists by the Nazi SS. We all hear about how authoritarian governments abduct and silence political opponents. It's something the West loves to criticize when it comes to countries like China, Russia, or North Korea. But this isn't China, Russia, North Korea, or 1930s Germany. This is America under Trump in the 21st century. And let's be clear, Sami Hamdi is being silenced, being incarcerated for potentially weeks. This is done to send a message, not just to Sami, but any pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist activists. Stay quiet, don't criticize Israel, don't criticize America, and don't even criticize Arab and Muslim countries if it means criticizing their support for Israel. So who is Sami Hamdi? He's a British Muslim who works as a journalist and political commentator. He's featured on various popular podcasts, invited by mainstream media like Sky News, with his videos being viewed by millions. He makes passionate defense of the Palestinian cause and calls out not only Israel's genocide, but states that support them. And it's not just Western states, but he also calls out Muslim countries, particularly Gulf countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
And it will cause shock for people. I actually argue that Saudi in particular is more in the Israeli camp than it is in the Palestinian camp by every measure possible.
But yet American officials want us to believe this is anything but a politically motivated detention. Here's what the spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security posted on X. Under President Trump, those who support terrorism and undermine American national security will not be allowed to work or visit this country. The Department of State also tweeted this. We said it before, we'll say it again. The United States has no obligation to host foreigners who support terrorism and actively undermine the safety of Americans. We continue to revoke visas of persons engaged in such activity. Then we have far-right pro-Zionist shills like Laura Loomer and Amy Meck high-fiving themselves, claiming they've got Trump's administration to detain and ultimately kick out Sami Hamdi from the country. Clearly, with all these accusations, it's clearly a smear campaign against a pro-Palestinian Muslim voice. Claims that he's a supporter of terrorism, claims that he's a national security threat, claim he belongs to some supposedly shadowy group called the Brotherhood or Ikhwan al-Muslimin. In fact, when Amy Met was lobbying Trump's government to revoke his visa, she wrote, and these are some of the reasons why Sami Hamdi, is a threat. She said that he instructs audiences to punish US officials, weaponize elections, and destabilize support for an American ally. Also instructs how to target critics who oppose their narrative. So basically, he's instructing Muslims to strategically vote in general elections. We're told constantly, or at least sold this idea that democracy is meant to be the way people elect their government and change those whom they don't feel represent their positions or values. But when Muslims engage in the Western system, they're weaponizing elections or weaponizing democracy and destabilizing America's ally. What does she mean by that? It's clear. She means that if anybody starts criticizing and exposing Israel and also criticizing and exposing America's unstunting support for Israel, that she's using this, very shadowy, very, clandestine term of destabilizing. It sounds, something very dangerous. But reality is it's just exposing the crimes and asking the question, why is America providing genocidal support or support for this genocidal regime? Makes no sense. But it's clear, and I've talked about this in my other videos, that Israel's tactic to reclaim the narrative is to go to your gutter far-right social media influencers like Laura Loomer, Amy Meck, or Tel Aviv Tommy. Pay them thousands, help them with posts, and push an anti-Muslim narrative to increase pro-Israel support. That's the tactic. There's a saying in England, birds of a feather flock together. Zionism and the far-right white nationalists are kindred spirits because both of them believe in creating an ethno-racial supremacist state. So it's not surprising that Zionists find willing allies with far-right nationalists, and I'm sure the shekels come in useful to keep that relationship strong. But there's also another alliance that's not really talked about, another actor who is also happy to see Sami Hamdi silenced. And to be honest, they are far more insidious than the Zionists. They also feed the anti-Muslim Islamophobic narrative too. That's the Arab and the Muslim regimes. And top of the list is the UAE. Inshallah, I'm going to do a documentary on them, and it'll probably be about 4 hours long. The amount of information that we have regards to UAE and what they have been doing, not just in the Muslim world, but also in the West. You see, Sami Hamdi wasn't just like any other political commentator when it came to pointing out the hypocrisy of the West and the crimes of Zionism. He also spoke about the Muslim world and how the Arab rulers have been complicit in their support for Zionism and therefore their genocide that's taken place within Gaza. He mentioned the point how they have the ability to leverage their wealth, their resources and power to have stopped the genocide, but they didn't.
The UAE and Saudi are so upset about the ceasefire that they've come out openly and they've said, Mr. Trump, we will not support your ceasefire plan if Hamas continue to stay in Gaza. If you don't allow the Israelis to achieve their aim of eradicating all resistance in Gaza, then Mr. Trump, you can't count on our 1.2 trillion. Think about it this way. They refuse to leverage their wealth and investments to stop the genocide. They offered the 1.2 trillion and 1.2 trillion from UAE, 1 trillion from Saudi. They offered it to Trump without conditioning it on ending the genocide. But now they are conditioning their investment on the condition that the genocide is allowed to continue, on the condition that the resistance is completely broken, on the condition that Palestine is disarmed, on the condition that Palestine is completely paralyzed and not able to resist the Israelis. Just think about that for a second, because the reality is that it blows your mind. That the leverage was not used to stop the genocide, it's being used to preserve the consequences of the genocide that the Israelis had wanted to achieve.
And that made him a threat to the rulers of the Muslim world, in particular Gulf countries, and even more specifically, the UAE and Saudi Arabia. You see, Laura Loomer and Amy Mack keep talking about banning the Muslim Brotherhood, this so-called shadowy organization, but yet they're not currently banned in America nor the UK. But do you know who else has been lobbying Britain and America, as well as other Western states, to ban the Muslim Brotherhood and any potential affiliates? Yes, the UAE. All of this connects to Sami Hamdi's detention, because it's not just America with its anti-Muslim attitude, nor Israel with its funding of anti-Muslim hatred, but it's also countries like the UAE who have helped create the environment where America can send its ICE militias to silence political dissidents. For years, the UAE have been on a campaign to wipe out the Muslim Brotherhood, but it's not about them. It's not just about this organization. It's far broader than that. They are just a convenient bogeyman used for this broader agenda. Just to explain very quickly about this, back in 2010, we saw the Arab Spring, popular uprisings in Muslim capitals calling for the overthrow of secular dictatorships. This resulted in the removal of Ben Ali, Gaddafi, Mubarak, Abdullah Saleh, and later Bashar al-Assad. It sent shockwaves throughout the Muslim world, each ruler fearing their turn may be next. And what made it even worse for them was the election of Mohammed Morsi, a Muslim Brotherhood member. But again, it wasn't about this group. It was not about the Brotherhood. It was about how the Egyptians, when given the opportunity, voted for an Islamic inclined candidate. They wanted to see an Islamic inclined candidate as opposed to a secular one come into power and become president. So not only were these Arab rulers fearful for another uprising, another popular uprising, but also the potential of a new type of leadership, an Islamic one that not only would topple their regimes, but dissolve the Sykes-Picot lines in the sand. UAE and other countries, but UAE in particular, then made it their mission to stamp out any future uprisings, and more specifically, any call for political Islam. In fact, UAE helped facilitate the removal of Mohammed Morsi in a military coup led by secular Egyptian generals. And when Egypt was placed under temporary sanctions by the West, both Saudi and the UAE covered the shortfall, funding Sisi's military dictatorship. UAE had been operating in Sudan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia and Gaza, counteracting calls for political Islam, all under the guise of counteracting the Muslim Brotherhood. But their actions haven't been limited to the Muslim world. Like I said, they've been calling for Western states to follow their agenda. This is what the UAE foreign minister said.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
They've also used sponsored agents like Amjad Taha to push an Islamophobic narrative like he did on GB News.
I think you have more extremists in UK than you have in the Middle East. The things that some of the Islamists say in various mosques, they would not be able to say it all the way in Afghanistan, for example.
So how has this been allowed to flourish in the UK?
So the Muslim Brotherhood, all the radical Islamists in Small Heath, in Al Amrak, in Birmingham, and other areas, we saw their voices. It was for Hamas.
Yes.
And Hamas, it's actually the armed forces of the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood in my country, for example, UAE, is banned, but however is not banned in the United Kingdom.
So it should be banned?
Absolutely, but they use the freedom of speech to censor your right to speak against them. They use the terminology Islamophobia just to stop you from criticizing.
Muslim Brotherhood infiltrating the West, trying to take over councils and subvert Western society. Again, this isn't about Ikhwan, but about the idea of opposing secular regimes. Return to the concept of one ummah and more Islam in governance within the Muslim world. UAE have prescribed various Muslim organizations, those in the West, including CARE, the American Muslim organization that invited Sami Hamdi on his speaking tour, and even Muslim charities like Islamic Relief, designating them as terrorist organizations, claiming that they are fronts for terrorism. UAE even have ties with Islamophobes to try and push this idea that ordinary Muslim institutions like charities, mosques and groups have its ties to a shadowy organization that looks to usurp Western values. All of this is done because they fear people like Sami Hamdi and others who use their platforms in the West to reach millions in the Muslim world. That exposes their complicity, their crimes with the Israeli state. Because these countries fear that if their treachery and their crimes are exposed, then this may lead to another uprising threatening their thrones. And this message from the UAE hasn't been unheard. Marco Rubio, in August of this year, has said or called for the banning of Muslim Brotherhood and its various branches. Ted Cruz reported as saying US either sanction or kill Muslim Brotherhood members. Both of them have cited that UAE, amongst other Arab countries, have banned Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore America should also follow suit. Look, all of this creates an authoritarian environment where Muslim voices and institutions are being silenced. Sami Hamdi is one of those casualties in this. I want you to think about this. Muslim regimes like the UAE are pushing Western states to view all Muslims in their country as potential extremists, supposedly infiltrated by an extremist organization. And these Arab and Muslim countries want harsher laws in the West against Muslims, more control, more monitoring, and more silencing of the Muslims in the West, in the UK, in America, and elsewhere. Why? Because they fear Muslims in the West having, relatively greater amount of freedom than compared to the Muslim world, have the ability to speak out against the crimes, not just of Western hypocrisy and the Zionist genocide, but also Arab rulers and their complicity. They're worried, basically saying to the West, follow our method on how we treat Muslims because, we know better. And we know what they do in their own countries. Ban pro-Palestinian protests, limit the dua for the Palestinians, increase ties with Israel, prevent any criticism against any actions their rulers do. They torture and imprison any political opponent and prevent and ban any discussions or call for Sharia governance. What a backwards world we live in. But there's also another side to this. Governments become more authoritarian when they lose the narrative, when they lose the support from its own people. They either bend to the public opinion or crack down hard against its own people. And ultimately, authoritarian governments fall in the long term because it's just simply unsustainable. You can't continue to brutalize your own population or attempt to silence them against obvious truths. There will be a breaking point. America, Israel, and Arab and Muslim world have been exposed. All their crimes are clear to see. They can't win the battle of ideas, so they resort to arrest and detention. But that only creates more people willing to stand up. Sami Hamdi is one Muslim, and inshallah he'll be released soon. But with him will be others who will stand up and speak the truth. Look, you can try and silence an idea, eliminate its proponents, but the fact is, ideas are bulletproof. Sami's detention, rather than silencing our voices, has only made their hypocrisy stand out even more, even to the wider non-Muslim audience in the West. look, we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Sami is released soon, that he and his family are given sabr, patience and perseverance in this difficult time, and that injustice is reversed. Allahumma ameen.